Hello and welcome to another Commander gameplay video on the Magic Boy production channel. I am Ben, aka Magic Boy on Magic the Gathering Online, and today we're going to be talking about Gao, Feral Youth. Before we get started, this is a brand new channel, so please like, share, subscribe. Let's get this channel growing and get this content out to as many people as possible. Today's video will consist of a deck overview. This is not going to be a card-by-card analysis, but it is going to go over the game plan of the deck and some overall trends and the types of cards included in it to enact that game plan. Then we're going to have 3 different gameplay videos. There were a couple of short ones this week, and so I decided to include an extra. After that, we'll go into our final thoughts. How did the deck perform? Were there any cards that we think could come out, or types of cards we'd like to come in? So with that, let's get into the deck overview. Gao, Feral Youth is a 2-mana 2/2, a human berserker with Rage. Whenever Gao attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And at the beginning of each end step, if a card left your graveyard this turn, Gao deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So this can potentially trigger on everyone's end step if you have a way to get a card out of your graveyard and potentially burn the table down quickly. There are a couple different ways to build this deck. I encountered Gao in Cube and it really kind of intrigued me because I thought of a lot of different ideas all at once. You can have a deck like the one I described that tries to activate Gao every single turn on the turn cycle and very quickly mount up damage on the board. But that felt like it was going to have a huge target on its head. Anytime somebody is just perpetually pumping out damage to everyone, people tend to look their way, and red is not great at defending itself in those situations. So I thought about maybe I could do some unearthed shenanigans. Unfortunately, the card pool for that wasn't really deep enough. There's also a Spellslinger variant of Gao. This was actually my second choice for what I would do, so maybe I'll come back to that in the future. But this would be more of a combo deck, a Spellslinger combo deck that pumps Gao's power with spells like Brute Force, and it flashes them back with Past in Flames, and then it just has one big Gao trigger at the end of turn to take everyone out in one shot. What I elected to do instead, as you can probably see, is an artifact deck. The core concept of having cards like Goblin Welder or Duretti Scrap Savant that move artifacts out of your graveyard gets you Gao triggers while also getting you additional value. I really like the play style of the red artifact deck. It can flip between proactive and reactive really easily and really powerfully, and that just felt like an interesting place to take this. This isn't going to be a deck that's maximizing our Gao triggers. It's more going to be using Gao opportunistically as a bit of a combo piece to deal the final bits of damage to everyone after the game has gone on for a bit. This is a bracket 3 deck, and so we'll start off talking about our game changers. 2 of them in our ramp section here, so we'll talk about them at the same time. We've got Grim Monolith and Mana Vault. Grim Monolith costs 2 mana. It taps for 3 colorless, and you can pay 4 mana to untap it. And then Mana Vault costs 1 mana, taps for 3 colorless mana, and if you don't untap it, it's going to start dealing you damage. You have to pay 4 during your upkeep, and then it deals you damage on your draw step. Kind of a weird older card, but both of these are colorless rituals, essentially, but they play really well with Voltaic Key and Manifold Key. And I'll talk a little bit more about my other ramp spells here. You can see we've got Basalt Monolith, Worn Power Stone, multiple things that tap for multiple mana because those also combo well with the keys. They can get you a big burst of mana, and if everything sticks around, you're consistently very ramped. Our third game changer is up here in the protection category. It's Deflecting Swat. We're not all in on Gao, but when we do invest in Gao, it's important to keep Gao alive. We've also got some other pieces like our Welders or big beaters that we would want to protect. And so having the access to some free interaction when our commander is in play, exactly when we want the free interaction, will probably go a long way. In this category, we also have a fun card in Eldritch Immunity. You don't see this often outside of Eldrazi type decks, but we have a good number of colorless sources, and it provides a very similar effect to Deflecting Swat, where we can surprise people by protecting a valuable piece. We also have the staples, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. These obviously can protect Gao, but they're also really great with the Welder and the Engineer, allowing them to start getting activations the turn they come down. Silent Arbiter is more of a protection for us. Honestly, we don't care that much about attacking with more than one creature most of the time, and this is just going to make it so the decks that go really, really wide can't pressure us too much. And it does have some additional utility I'll talk about in a little bit. This is an artifact deck, and so we have a lot of cards that work with artifacts. You probably saw our ramp package has tons of artifacts. Our draw package also has tons of artifacts, but we have the cards that cheat artifacts out of your graveyard, Goblin Welder, Engineer, the various Durettis, Trash for Treasure. We have a Living Death for artifacts and Scrap Mastery. And then we have a bunch of other cards that sort of play really well with artifacts, like Krark Clan Ironworks and Kuldotha Forge Master. Metalwork Colossus can get us an instant Gao trigger by sacrificing some artifacts, and it's typically going to come down for free, just be a big dude. Mirror Battlefield is another big dude. It's an army in a can and has some additional synergy with the damage doublers that we're going to talk about later. A really fun card that I ended up putting in this deck when I was looking for artifact sacrifice outlooks is Scrap Card Recombiner. We have a bunch of constructs that made their way into our deck for other reasons, and so being able to pitch something useless to go find one of those is actually pretty cool. One of the things I really hope we get to do. Our draw package is actually less card advantage and more card selection. Red has a lot of cards that let you discard a card to draw cards, sometimes those make treasures. Several of them flashback, which is valuable because that can get you a Gao trigger. And then we also have some artifact card advantage sources like Coveted Jewel, really premium when you have welders that can take it offline so your opponents can't steal it from you. You have Sensei's Dividing Top, that's not going to get us card advantage unless we get a little tricky, but it will give us great card selection. Mightstone and Weakstone is a mana rock that draws you cards and can also be welded in and out. Card to highlight is Ruin Grinder. This has mountain cycling, so it can go get you a mountain and put itself in your graveyard, and then you can weld it into play, and if you weld it out, everybody can discard their hand and draw 7 cards. So you can play out a bunch of cards and then draw a fresh 7. We have a finisher category. These are cards that really kind of work particularly well with Gao, that are going to be the cards that enable us to use him as a bit of a soft combo finish. We've got Blackblade Forged, Bulk Up, and Excalibur that can increase Gao's power to make him lethal. Bulk Up is particularly fun because it has flashback itself out of the graveyard, so you can cast it twice, get that Gao trigger, double his power twice. I mentioned damage doublers. We have Insult to Injury, Isengard Unleashed, and not a doubler, but Sulfim Mayhem Dominus. These also just play well with having big scary artifacts in play, particularly Mirror Battlesphere. You can double up on its attack trigger, and then also on the damage that it deals in combat, which can oftentimes knock one player out in one shot. Sulfim Mayhem Dominus, this is a card I'm not sure about, but I do like that it's a discard outlet. In addition to supporting Gao triggering on multiple turns, you can effectively double damage if his power is only 2. And then we have Roaming Throne. This obviously, when it comes down naming Berserker or Human, will double up Gao's 1/1 counters and then also end step trigger, which can surprise kill people. Finally, we have a couple of extra turn spells. We have Rise of the Eldrazi, which we have a ton of colorless mana production in this deck. And so we can cast that. And if you draw 4 cards, remove the most problematic permanent on the board, and then take an extra turn, you're probably going to win the game. And then Ugin's Nexus, which can be welded out to get us an extra turn. Extra turns are always nice, but it's particularly nice when you can set up a Gao kill by getting Gao in play, maybe playing out your artifact, but you don't quite have enough to finish everyone off. Taking that extra turn can get you there. Quickly talk about our lands. This is a monocolor deck, so we have a ton of utility in our mana base. We only play 36 lands because we have enough cheap artifacts that will let us get ahead on mana that it feels like we can skimp on a land there. There's the artifact utility that you would expect. And then there's also some cards that go with Gao that can exile cards from the graveyard, like Hostile Desert or Mines of Moria. And then we've also got some red utility lands, MDFCs, Arena of Glory, etc. Last but not least, or actually kind of least in this case, is our removal package. This is a deck that cares more about enacting its own plan than disrupting our opponents. And so we just have a few pinpoint removal spells. We have Chaos Warp and Temple's Trickery, which are very open-ended to help protect us from whatever we may need. Cityscape Leveler is a big construct that can destroy any permanent and replace it with a Power Stone, so that can destroy something really problematic that might be stopping us from going for a Gao kill. Ghost Vacuum is an all-star in this deck. It can activate Gao on other people's turns, and then it can also discard Graveyard Shenanigans. Speaking of shenanigans, we have a card named Shenanigans. This is an artifact removal spell with Dredge, just something that can potentially trigger Gao when we cast it. And Untimely Malfunction plays a versatile role. It can destroy an artifact, it can make it so creatures can't block, or it can change the target of a spell or ability with a single target, functionally being a deflecting swat to help protect Gao or one of our other pieces. For sweepers, we have 4 sweepers total. Blasphemous Act is one of the premium sweepers in the format. It usually only costs 1 red mana, and that means that you can rebuild after casting it in the same turn. Chandra's Ignition can be a one-sided board wipe or just a massive source of damage. We have a lot of big creatures in this deck in our little artifact package, or Gao can potentially get pretty big. Portal to Phyrexia is an all-star with the Welder strategy. You can discard it early, weld it back into play, wipe the board, start stealing creatures out of graveyards. And then Spiteful Banditry is a little bit expensive, but this deck is pretty mana hungry and pretty artifact hungry. And so the fact that it's a board wipe that can also start getting you treasures can be really valuable. So to summarize, the game plan here is very flexible. We're just going to probably do some ramping, do some sculpting of our hand, see where the game goes, see what sort of position we can get, and then find a place to put down Gao and use Gao to finish things off. That's going to do it for the deck overview. Let's go ahead and hop into our first of 3 games. Our opening hand only has a single colorless source and doesn't really have much to get us going, so we're going to go ahead and ship that. Our second 7 has plenty of lands and has some play to it. We've got a Ghost Vacuum that can trigger our Gao and protect us from graveyard shenanigans. Roaming Throne is a really strong combo piece with Gao that'll let us double up on their trigger. And then Mana Geyser is an extremely powerful source of mana. We need to get some stuff going, but it's going to give us the mana we need to cast some big plays later on. Our first opponent is Aragorn the Uniter. This is a 4-color commander, excluding black, that's going to get our opponent value off of the different colors of spells they cast. Typically, this deck has a lot of multicolor spells so that they can get multiple triggers off of Aragorn, but this one is a little bit special. We'll see what's going on with it later. Aragorn Hornborg Hero is a Naya commander that deals with +1/+1 counters. It grants your creatures Renown, and then when a Renown creature connects, it's going to double the counters on it, so we can expect this to be pretty +1/+1 and combat-focused deck. Ardbert, Warrior of Darkness, is our third opponent. This is an Orzhov commander that deals with legendary creatures, so we could probably expect a lot of legendary creatures out of this deck. When you cast white spells, your legendary creatures get +1/+1 in Vigilance, and when you cast black spells, your legendary creatures get +1/+1 in Menace, and so you can create a big board, build it up, and then swing pretty freely into your opponents. So we're expecting lots of legendary creatures and then spells that are both black and white to get double triggers. 4-color Aragorn starts off with a Spectator Seating, and they're going to cast Zidane Tribal, aka Ragavan. We have a Jetmir's Garden from the Aragorn Hornborg Hero player, and it looks like the Ardbert player has just dropped out, so we're down to 3. We're going to play a mountain and cast our Ghost Vacuum. The 4-color Aragorn plays a Howling Mine, which is cool. We like drawing cards, and doesn't attack with their Ragavan, which is an interesting choice to me. 3-color Aragorn has a Soul Ring, and they're going to follow that up with Haldir, Lorien Lieutenant for X=2. Draw our card from Howling Mine. It's a Mox Opal, and we'll play out Inventor's Fair. And we're just going to run out Gao in this game. We don't have much to do, and so maybe we can get some triggers and start chipping away at people's life total. 4-color Aragorn has a Path of Ancestry, and then a Kessig Flame Breather. It's going to let them start pinging for their non-creature spells. Howling Mine triggers. We have a Plains from the Naya Aragorn, and Aragorn makes an appearance. Their floating mana casts Barrow Blade, and the Lieutenant comes in at us. We're just going to let that happen. It gets its Renown trigger, so it's going to get a +1/+1 counter. Howling Mine draws us a card. We're going to swing with Gao, getting a +1/+1 counter on him, and the Unifier does not block. Play our Mox Opal, just so we don't have to discard it to hand size. They have a Reflecting Pool, and they're going to cast Aragorn, scrying a card to the top off of their Path of Ancestry. More card draw off Howling Mine for the Hornborg Hero. They're going to play out the Shire. And then they're going to cast Glowin, Dwarf Emissary, start generating some treasures for their historic spells. And they have a historic spell in the form of Mithril Coat, so they'll get a Glowin trigger. And Mithril Coat will attach to Aragorn, giving him indestructible. Barrow Blade will also attack. Aragorn swings in at Aragorn on Aragorn violence, and the Lieutenant comes at us. There's going to be some triggers, and so the Aragorn will get its first counter from Renown, and the Lieutenant will double. Howling Mine draws us another card. We're going to play out the Black Blade Reforged. This is going to equip to Gao and just give us a decent-sized blocker to hopefully stem the bleeding here. There's a lot of creatures on the board and a lot of damage that can be thrown around. Gets their own Howling Mine and plays a mountain. And then they're going to cast a Volcanic Offering. This is an interesting little political card. They do get an Aragorn trigger to deal 3 damage to each of us, and a Kessig Flamebreather trigger as well. And the Volcanic Offering is going to let me and the Uniter target a land. I elect to, we both target Jetmir's Garden. I don't want to double Stone Rain this person and make an enemy of them, but Hornborg Hero is going to get to sling 7 damage, and so with that, the 7 damage is going to go to Haldur's Lieutenant, taking it out, and to Gao. And Gao will go back to our command zone. Ragavan comes at us, and the Unifier goes at the other Aragorn. They're going to get a trigger. They don't get a spell they can cast, but they do get a treasure token. We have an untap, Howling Mine draw, and an Overgrown Farmland. We're going to cast Aragorn and Arwen Wen, netting them a treasure off Glowin and putting a +1/+1 counter on their other creatures. Glowin gets activated, and it seems they misclicked and targeted themselves, so they goaded Glowin. And Aragorn Hornborg Hero is going to swing in at the Aragorn Uniter. It's going to double number counters on them. We're going to exile that Volcanic Offering with our Ghost Vacuum, just make sure there's no shenanigans. We get a trigger off our Inventor's Fair for 1 life, and Howling Mine draws us a very good card in the form of Portal to Phyrexia. We're going to cast our Mana Geyser, and that's going to net us 9 mana, which is exactly enough to cast the Portal to Phyrexia. And both of our opponents have 3 creatures, so it's going to completely wipe the board. We'll follow up with a Goblin Welder off our Mox Opal. Howling Mine keeps on howling, screaming cards into people's hands. They play another mountain and cast Twin Flame Tyrant. And this is about when I realized that it seems this Aragorn deck is mono red burn. We have a Taiga from Hornborg Hero. They cast Arwen, Weaver of Hope. She's going to put 1/1 counters on things equal to her toughness, and so Barrow Blade is going to mean even more 1/1 counters for what enters. But all they have is some equips protecting their Arwen. We get a trigger from Inventor's Fair gaining a life, and we're going to steal Glowin out of their graveyard with our Phyrexian Portal so we can start generating some treasures of our own. We recast Gao, and that gets us a treasure. We play a Volcanic Fissure tapped and then just pass the turn. We've got Tybalt's Trickery and Deflecting Swat up now, so I'm feeling pretty safe to take this slow. We have a Scalding Tarn for a mountain after the Howling Mine draw for Aragon the Uniter. And they play a Gutter Snipe, so with Twin Flame Tyrant, that means every instant and sorcery is going to be 4 damage, and so they're just going to throw a shock right at the face of the other Aragorn. It's going to deal 4 to each of us and 4 to them. They follow up with a Biforce, X equals 2, that's going to target Portal to Phyrexia and the Barrow Blade. We get 4 from the Gutter Snipe, but I'm going to Deflecting Swat. I really just want to protect my own card, so I don't care about like picking off Soul Ring. I like the Howling Mine, so I just redirect to the Mithril Coat. They swing at us with Twin Flame Tyrant, dealing a chunky little 6 damage to us. Hornborg Hero draws off Howling Mine. They play a Clifftop Retreat. They have Merry, Esquire of Rohan. That's going to combine well with their other legendary creature, letting them draw some cards. They swing Arwen at the Aragorn player and Merry at us. We just let that come through, and they get to draw their card off the trigger. They follow up with Gandalf the White. On our upkeep, we're going to gain a life from Inventor's Fair, and Portal to Phyrexia is going to grab us Aragorn and Arwen Wen, which is going to boost up our board with a 1/1 counter. We draw with the Howling Mine, which is lovely. And we're going to cast Roaming Throne. This will get us a treasure, and it's also going to become a Berserker and double up all our Berserker triggers. We equip Blackblade Reforged to Gao and play Pit of Offerings. That's going to let us exile Deflecting Swat so that we can get a Gao trigger at our end step. We go to combat. We're just swinging out to make sure life totals are low enough that Gao will definitely kill. The Aragorn player has a Heroic Intervention, which is just going to let them block for free, but we get double counters on Gao. Our attacks come in and chip everyone down to damage, and at the end step, Gao is going to get double 12 damage triggers and take everyone out, so we win the game. Before we get into discussing the gameplay, one of the reasons I chose to do this video, even though it was essentially a 3-player game, was that I thought both of the Aragorn decks were really cool. Aragorn the Uniter, typically you see this as a multicolor matters commander. It's cast spells with multiple colors, and that way it gets multiple triggers off of Aragorn and can get tons of value each turn. But Aragorn is essentially a souped up gutter snipe. You can have lifelink equipment to be gaining 9 life a shot out of those triggers for 3 damage at 3 opponents. And then Aragorn, Hornburg Hero, really cool that was a very flavorful deck. There was just a ton of Lord of the Rings cards in it. I'm not sure how close it was to the precon, maybe if it was. I'm not familiar with that one. But there aren't a lot of Naya counter options. We've got Shalai and Halar. And so you just get some interesting options adding red and white to the mix. You get things like channel favorite all will be 1, or white +1/+1 counter support is pretty diverse. I'm curious if the Lord of the Rings thematicness might have interfered with the power of the deck, if there were some staples they left out in favor of more flavorful options, but overall it was really cool. The game itself was really exactly what we want to see with this deck. We did have a Howling Mine in play. That's always going to be great content. When everyone gets to draw an extra card every turn, they're generally going to be able to do their thing. Aragorn 1 got to burn, Aragorn 2 got to make a bunch of counters, and we got to play out our artifact game plan and then finish things off with double triggers from Gao. Big shout out to Portal to Phyrexia. It's no secret that this card is really powerful, but it came at exactly the right moment to wipe the board and then start pushing us ahead. The game itself also helped us. Everyone's life total was going down. There was no particular big bad enemy to worry about. And so with everyone at a pretty low life total, it wasn't hard to finish things off with the Feral Youth. All right, let's see what Game 2 has in store. We're going to keep our first 7. We've got 3 lands if you count Pinnacle Monk, access to both red and colorless. Urza Saga is a really powerful land that's going to be able to fetch us an artifact later on. And then we've got some other options that can kind of go in different directions depending on how the game evolves. We've got Goblin Engineer to recur artifacts. We've got Shenanigans to trigger Gao and destroy artifacts. Descent into Avernus can set us up for a big turn. And Worn Power Stone can ramp our mana to advance us towards some of our bigger plays in our deck. So that's pretty great. We'll keep it and see where things go. The Wise Mothman is our first opponent. This is a Sultai commander that has a mill strategy. It came from the Fallout precons. It's going to give out some rad counters and grow as people mill cards. It's usually a pretty scary commander because it has inherent Voltron strategy that's pretty threatening while also milling and getting a lot of value. Sultai is great at getting value. Our second opponent is Lelia, the Blade Reforged. This is another mono-red commander, so shout out to mono-red commanders. Lelia cares about cards being exiled. She gets a +1/+1 counter whenever that happens, and when she attacks, she exiles a card herself. So she's got some card advantage built into her. We'll probably see some exile synergies out of a pretty aggressive deck. Ovika Enigma Goliath is our final opponent. This is a 7-mana Izzet commander. It's a big scary creature in its own right, but even scarier is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get hasty goblins equal to its mana value. So this is probably going to be something of a spellslinger deck with some token synergies. It's going to probably have some build-up because Ovika is pretty expensive and you have to get them into play. But after that, they'll be off to the races, creating tons of tokens and getting aggressive. The Wise Mothman starts us off with the Woodland Cemetery. We're going to play a Mystic Peak tapped. Some land value out of our MDFC. Lelia has a Bomat Courier. I love that card. It comes in a swing-in and is going to exile a card that can later be added to their hand. Deals 1 damage to the Wise Mothman player. We've got a tapped Lonely Sandbar. The Wise Mothman is going to basic land cycle on Ash Barrens and then play a Forest out. We get a trigger from this Urza Saga that enters, so it can add mana, and then we're going to play a Goblin Engineer. We have a lot of options here as far as what we could put into our graveyard, but with the Urza Saga, I'm going to get some kind of mana rock in the future, and I want to pair that with the Manifold Key. Got another Mountain from Lelia and a Ruby Medallion, reducing the cost of all the red spells. Beaumont Courier goes a swinging, adding another card to its little trove there and dealing 1 to the Ovika player. They have an island and they cast a Soul Ring, and then they cast a Zenith Chronicler, a weird little card that lets players draw cards when other players cast multicolor spells. Wise Mothman has an island, and they pass. Urza's Saga gets its second trigger, so it can make some constructs, and we play out a Demolition Field. We're going to cast a Lightning Greaves and just protect our Goblin Engineer so it can get up to Shenanigans. Lelia plays Shinka, the Blood-Soaked Keep, and then they cast their commander for just 2 mana. They go into the red zone, Beaumont Courier gets a trigger, Lelia gets a trigger. That's going to exile a card for them so that they can have some other options this turn. Put a counter on Lelia as well, and then the exile from Beaumont also puts a counter on Lelia, making her a 4/4. And they've now got 3 cards under that Beaumont. And then they're going to play Tempered in Solitude for just 1 mana. This is it's sort of like Exalted Impulse Draw. When you attack with 1 creature, you get to exile. We have a Mountain from Ovika. And they're going to spend 4 mana to cast Bident of Thassa, let them get some card draws off of dealing damage. They swing the Zenith Chronicler in at Lelia, triggering the Bident and drawing a card. Wise Mothman just passes to us, and so we're going to activate our Goblin Engineer, swapping our Lightning Greaves for our Manifold Key in our graveyard. Urza's Saga is going to trigger again. We're going to tap it for 1 mana and then go find a 1 or 0 cost artifact. We like to go with Soul Ring. We could have done Mana Vault, but I just wanted a slightly more consistent play, and this lets us do what we want. So we're going to do a little trick where we untap Soul Ring with Manifold Key to get some extra mana, and then we'll play Mirror Battlesphere. Nice wide board to protect us. Lelia goes into the red zone. They're going to swing their Beaumont Courier and their Lelia, getting their stacks of triggers. So put Lelia up to 6. And they follow up with a 1 mana Inti, another powerful discard exile-based card. And then Ren's Revolve is going to exile some cards for them to potentially play in the future. And they're going to play one of those cards, a Magmatic Channeler. We've got an Abstergo Entertainment and a Talisman of Creativity from the Ovika player. Abstergo is kind of annoying. We want to use our graveyard, so we want that to not be a problem anymore. They have a Dolmen Gate, which is it's going to protect their attacking creatures from damage, and then they're going to Chaos Warp Lelia, netting a mountain for the Lelia player. Zenith Chronicler swings on in, so it can get a Bident of Thassa trigger, hitting the Wise Mothman player, who sadly hasn't really done much this game, and they're actually going to concede there. We go to our turn and draw the Might Stone and the Weak Stone. We're going to do our mana trick with Manifold Key and Soul Ring so that we can cast that. It's going to draw us 2 cards and then sit around to cast more artifacts. That artifact is going to be Worn Power Stone, so we're really ramping up on mana. And we're just going to pass. We're going to keep our Mox Opal. Got another mountain from Lelia. They're going to cast Triple Triad. That's a fun card for Final Fantasy that lets you exile cards from everyone's library and compare the cost. It's actually the in-game card game in Final Fantasy, so it's a card game and a card game. They're going to attack with their Beaumont Courier, getting a trigger off of their enchantment, getting another card under the Beaumont, and then getting to exile something to Inti. They follow up with Kedis, Emberclaw Familiar, which is pretty scary. We've already seen Lelia can get pretty big. Ovika has an island, and they're going to cast their commander. That's going to draw each of us a card off their Zenith Chronicler, which is pretty funny. That's actually, they're now against monocolored decks, so they cycle a Forgotten Cave and go to combat. They swing the Zenith Chronicler, probably wanting to get rid of it, and I think that the Lelia player has caught on, and so they do get a Bident of Thassa trigger, but Zenith Chronicler sticks around to draw us cards and not its controller. We're going to play Descent into Avernus, just start ending this game with some damage and some treasure tokens. We play a tap Desert of the Fervent and pass. We're in good position. Triple Triad triggers. Unfortunately, they exile a mountain and play it, but they're not able to play any of our spells. Urabrask Heretic Praetor comes in. It's a 4/4 with haste that converts its opponent's draws into exile. Urabrask converts Ovika's draw into an exile. They are going to kick things off with a Disrupt Decorum, goading everything and getting 4 goblins for the mana value. The Lelia player decides they don't want a goaded Mirror Battlesphere running around, and so you find some prisoners to destroy it, and we are going to unhatch our little plan here, activating Demolition Field and destroying their Shinka Blood-Soaked Keep. That's going to allow both of us to search a basic land onto the battlefield untapped, so we will grab a mountain. That will give us a sneaky red source to activate our Goblin Engineer, and so we are going to trade our giant monstrous battle construct for some shoes. Switching it out for Lightning Greaves. They elect to sacrifice their Beaumont Courier in response, trading out their hand with all the cards underneath it, and triggers exiling some cards. And then the stack resolves, you find some prisoners fizzles because its target's no longer there, and everything that's left over gets goaded. For their next trick, they are going to cast an Eldrazi Monument, which is terrifying. They get 5 goblins off of Ovika, and then they send everything at the Lelia player, and unfortunately they concede. That's going to deny the Ovika player a ton of card draw, which could have really affected this game. So if you play on Magic Online, only concede at sorcery speed, please. Descent into Avernus will trigger on our upkeep, making 2 treasure tokens and dealing 2 to each of us. We're going to play out a mountain, and then we're going to spend quite a bit of mana to cast Scrap Mastery. Could have floated some mana there, but didn't for some reason. That's going to wipe out all the artifacts and bring back our Mere Battlesphere. We play out Monk's Opal. We play out Mana Vault. We're going to tap the Mana Vault for mana and then engineer it into the graveyard, getting back our Lightning Greaves. And add some red mana to our mana pool. That way we can cast Isengard Unleashed, tripling all damage that will be dealt until the end of the turn. Gao comes down just as a little bit of insurance policy, but we're going to put the boots on the Mere Battlesphere and go to combat. Its attack trigger will tap down 4 of its little friends there to deal 4 damage, which is actually 12 damage to Ovika, and then the 8/7 tripled will finish them off. This was another essentially 3-player game, which is unfortunate. I really think that 4-player Commander games make for the best content. I understand the Wise Mothman missing their land drop and tapping out. On Magic Online, you can kind of just go out into another game immediately, as opposed to in paper where you just sit around waiting for your friends to finish, so really you'd probably just stick it out. The decks that we played against, the Lelia deck, was very aggressive. We got to see that there's tons of ways that her Exile trigger can put counters on her, and so that could get very scary as like a Voltron commander pretty quickly. The Ovika deck played out pretty much as we expected. It had a long runway to getting Ovika in play, and then once it did, it was off to the races. It's worth noting here that the Ovika player very easily could have won that game if the Lelia player had not scooped in combat. Drawing a whole bunch of cards could easily have found them an answer to what we were doing. You know, this is bracket 3, they could have drawn a Force of Will, but we were still in a pretty good place to end the game from there through some interaction. We had a good amount of mana and plenty of options, and so I did include this game anyways because I thought it showed another side of this deck and some pretty cool decks from our opponent. It bears repeating and maybe a little bit of expounding, but if you're going to concede from a multiplayer game, you should really just consider concession to be a sorcery speed option. Otherwise, you get into some Kingmaker scenarios, whether it's unintentional and you just didn't realize you were denying someone card draw, or I've seen intentional where you take a big swing at someone you've been having some issues with in the game and then tap out. Your departure is already going to be a disruption. You know, people were playing that game, planning as if they had a 4th opponent and using their spells appropriately. So don't be any more disruptive than that if you can afford to. Our first 7 is pretty great. We've got 3 lands and then a ramp spell in the form of Strike It Rich. We've got some cards that will help us dig through our deck and demand answers in Laughing Mad. And then we have a potentially big payoff in Ugin's Nexus to grab us an extra turn when we can set that up. So that's pretty great. We'll keep it and see where things go. Joshua, Phoenix's Dominant, is one of the Final Fantasy commanders. This is a Boros commander that has some graveyard synergies. It has discard synergies and then can eventually get stuff back out of the graveyard. It seems like a commander that there's a lot of different ways to build it, but I would expect to see cards coming out of their hand for some value, setting them up for bigger plays, probably a fairly aggressive deck too. The Lelia player from our last game is back. This is, again, it's a 3-mana red commander that cares about cards being exiled. It can gain counters when cards get exiled, and then also exile cards itself. So it's got some card advantage built in. It's going to be an aggressive deck. We've seen it, and so it's going to have lots of exile synergies. The final commander is Bassam ibn Ishaq. This is one of the Assassin's Creed commanders. This is my first time seeing any of them in action. This is a Dimir 2/2 with a whole lot of abilities. This card kind of does it all. It's pretty powerful. I'd be interested to build a pretty competitive version of this deck someday because it seems like a pretty competitive commander. It's a 2-mana 2/2. Whenever you cast a historic spell, it becomes unblockable and you draw a card, but that only happens once per turn. And then when it connects, it puts a counter on itself. So it continues to grow. I'm expecting this to be an artifacty Voltron deck based on the text on the card, but it does seem like there's a lot of latitude to do a lot with it. Joshua player kicks things off with a tap Path of Ancestry before passing it over to us. We're going to play a mountain and play a great turn 1 play for this deck in Strike It Rich, making us a treasure and maybe flashbacking later to trigger Gao. The Lelia player has a mountain. They use that to cast Mishra's Research Desk. Nice little mono-red cantrip. Basim has a Tainted Isle and the classic turn 1 play of Soul Ring into Talisman. So they're going to have 5 mana on their turn 2. Good for them. We have a mountain from the Joshua player, and they're going to cast Inti. That's going to get them a Scry to the bottom of their library and a card that synergizes really well with their commander. We are just going to play out a command beacon for turn and then pass. We have a Chaos Warp that we could potentially deploy if needed or demand answers. The Lelia player digs with the Research Desk, finding a mountain and playing it. Basim untaps. They play out an island, and it's time for their commander. Basim is going to hit the field. They follow that up with a Foundry Inspector, triggering the Legendary Assassin to draw a card and make it unblockable, and that little 3/2 is going to reduce their artifact cost going forward. Joshua has a Plains for turn, and they're going to cast Glinthorn Buccaneer, a pretty powerful payoff for discard strategies. They go to combat, swinging Inti at us and the Buccaneer at the Basim player. It's going to get them some triggers. They discard a card to Inti, putting a counter on it. We're going to get pinged by the Buccaneer, and they exile a card for Inti's discard. At end of turn, we're just going to cast our demand answers. We're going to sacrifice our treasure token that we created and draw 2 cards. We untap and basic land cycle a Ruin Grinder, and that's going to get us a mountain. Play out our Sensei's Divining Top and pass the turn. The Lelia player has a Furious Rise, so that's going to potentially get them some impulse draws once they have a 4-power creature. Academy Ruins comes down for Basim. They cast Champion's Helm, which is going to trigger Basim for unblockability and a card draw. They're going to use their floating mana to equip it. After that, they swing into Joshua, and that's going to deal 4 commander damage and put a +1/+1 counter on the assassin. They follow up with Mox Amber. Then they have a Loyal Inventor. This is going to grab them an artifact from their library, and because they control an assassin, put it right into their hand. Have a juiced up Trinket Mage for that Kindred sect. Joshua doesn't have a land, but they do have a Tersa Light Shatter. That's going to scry them a card to the bottom. And when it enters, allow them to discard up to 2 cards and draw 2 cards. They discard 2, creating some triggers, pinging us with the Buccaneer, and exiling some cards to Inti, getting them more options, one of which is a Arid Archway, a desert that bounces their mountain. They go to combat and swing everything at Basim. They're going to get some triggers here. The Inti is going to discard a card and put a 1/1 counter on itself. We get pinged by the Glinthorn. The Basim player just lets the Loyal Engineer block the Buccaneer. That's free, and they take the rest of the damage. We get to untap relatively unscathed. We're going to play out a tap Desert of the Fervent, and then pass. We've got Laughing Mad and Chaos Warp up, so we can either protect ourselves or, if we don't need to, develop our hand. We have a Fire Diamond from the Lelia player. Seems like maybe they're struggling a bit to find their land drops. Basim has an Exotic Orchard, and they have a free Excalibur Sword of Eden, triggering Basim to draw a card and make Basim unblockable. And then they're going to equip the sword, making Basim a massive threat. They have a 1-mana Reality Chip, a cool little equipment. And then they're going to reconfigure that onto Basim and swing at Joshua. That's going to deal a very impressive 15 commander damage to Joshua and get another counter on Basim. Not looking good for Joshua, but they're fighting the good fight. Lightning Greaves comes down. We're going to equip that to Basim, double protect him, Shroud and Hexproof, sure. Joshua untaps. They're going to start things off with a Brass's Tunnel Grinder. That's going to let them discard as many cards as they want and draw that many cards +1. They're going to discard all 3 of the cards in their hand, getting their triggers. And so Inti will exile some cards for them. Glinthorn will ping us all for 1 for each of these discards. And they have some options for what they might be able to do this turn. Doesn't seem like they have any options other than combat, though. They do get a Tersa trigger, but that's not useful. Inti triggers and they discard a card to put another counter on Inti and ping us with the Glinthorn Buccaneer. They're going to exile another card as well. Bossum decides that they want to trade Foundry Inspector for Tursa and then get that free block on the Glinthorn Buccaneer, so they just take their inty damage. Post-combat, there's a fear of missing out, discarding yet another card, getting yet another inty and Glinthorn trigger, pinging us and exiling a card and then drawing a card. They go to end step, and we're going to discard our Cityscape Leveler to Laughing Mad to draw a couple cards, and they're going to get a counter because they descended. We untap. We're going to play out a Mox Opal. We're going to play out a Mines of Moria tap and a Goblin Welder. And then we play a Ghost Vacuum. This is going to give us 3 artifacts to turn on Mox Opal, and so we have a Chaos Warp to protect ourselves a little bit if we need to, and we've got set up for next turn. Lelia is going to unearth their Mishra's Research Desk, and with their floating mana, sacrifice it again. They're, I think, digging for lands, but unfortunately they find a Count on Luck that doesn't do much this turn. They pass to Bossum, they play a Swamp, and they have a Buster Sword to trigger, making Bossum unblockable. This is going to probably spell the end for Joshua, but instead they equip the sword to the Loyalists. They've, if they're going to be destroying Joshua, they might get some other value. They play a Propaganda to shut down avenues for reprisal, and the Bossum is indeed going to take Joshua out of their misery. We let the Loyalists connect. They get a Buster Sword trigger, so they get to draw a card and then play a card for free, less than the damage that was dealt. And they get a very thematic Royal Assassin, cool card to include in this deck, I think. RIP Joshua, good job. We activate our Sensei's top end of turn, reorganizing the cards on top of our library. Draw and player Voltaic Key. This does have a neat little synergy with Sensei's top. You can tap the top to draw a card, and with that ability on the stack, untap it with the key and get another draw. But we're aiming for bigger this turn. Joshua's gone, we gotta start moving, so we play an Ugin's Nexus and weld it into our graveyard for a Ruin Grinder. That gets us an extra turn. We go to combat, swing the Ruin Grinder at the Lelia player. We do have to deal with them at some point, but then we just weld the Ruin Grinder out. This is going to grab us a Cityscape Leveler and let everyone discard their hand to draw 7 fresh ones, which everyone does. We play out a Mountain for our turn, and we're going to play a Seasoned Pyromancer. It's going to let us discard the expensive artifacts in our hand to weld later and also make us some tokens. Later is now, though, because we have Duretti Scrap Savant, and we will -2 it to sacrifice an artifact. This is going to be our Voltaic Key, and that'll get us Portal to Phyrexia, which is going to, for the most part, clear Bossum's board, leaving behind the reconfigured Reality Chip. The Lelia player untaps. They have a tapped Quarry Mountain Monastery, and they cast that Count on Luck that they exiled earlier. Bossum starts things off with Desynchronization, returning all non-historic permanents to their owner's hands. They're going to follow up by redeploying Bossum. They're going to do some equipping. They're going to get the boots and swing it into the Lelia player to get it, just to get a counter, it seems. Continue developing their board with another land. Portal to Phyrexia goes off on our upkeep, and we're going to make the Loyal Inventor our Loyal Inventor. We don't have an Assassin, so this card's going to go on top of our library. It's a Lightning Greaves, but we get to draw it for turn, so kind of similar effect. We're going to play out that Greaves, which is going to go really well with our Goblin Welder. We're going to plus Duretti, discarding a Scrapyard Recombiner and a Sokenzen to see some more options. I do a bit of a brain flub here. I cast Isengard Unleashed. That's going to triple damage till the end of turn, and then I'm pretty sure that I can kill Bossum by assigning just 2 damage to their blocker and then trampling over for the rest. So Cityscape Leveler is going to take out the Ruby Medallion because I think I'm killing the other player. Loyal Inventor is going to swing their way too. But actually I have to assign the full 6 damage, and so I only get to trample over for 2, which becomes 6, which means Bossum's alive. That's okay though, we have a plan B, so we'll cast Goblin Welder and Greaves it up. The Lelia player just untaps and passes. Bossum starts things off with a Cranial Plating, getting their Bossum trigger to be unblockable and draw a card, and that's Leila's had enough. They haven't really gotten to do anything this game. I kind of get it, so sorry to them. Good game. Sig River Cutthroat is the play, which is going to take the Greaves so that they can start equipping stuff to Bossum. Excalibur goes onto it. Cranial Plating goes onto it. Buster Sword. They're going to equip the Champion's Helm as well to give it protection and swing at us, but they don't have protection for the Excalibur, and so we're going to take a lot of its power away, making it so that this is not a lethal hit. They do connect with Buster Swords, and they get an Anrakir the Traveler. They also get a counter on Basim. And so they're going to draw a card with Sig at the end of turn because we took way more than 3 damage. On our upkeep, Phyrexian Portal will bring back our Mirror Battlesphere and a complement of mirrors. And I'm a little worried about something like a Swan Song or an Offer You Can't Refuse, so I decide to do some softening up in combat first to just see what our options are. I could have flashback Isengard, which would have been lethal, but 1 counterspell would have been bad. We're going to Cityscape level the Anraker to get a blocker out of the way, and we are going to tap our little mirror friends to pump our Mirror Battlesphere and knock them down to 4. They are going to do some blocking here because otherwise they die. And so we get to clear out everything except for the Sig. Duretti, I'm looking to finish this game. If I can find a pump spell, I can kill them. And so I activate Duretti to discard some cards and draw some cards. I don't really find anything though. I don't want to keep digging because I don't have a lot of mana. So I'll Greaves up the Goblin Welder and then cast Duretti, Rocketeer Engineer. This is going to get back our Cityscape leveler, but even more importantly, put our Phyrexian Portal into our graveyard so that we can weld that out later. We put that in Gao, and Gao will trigger at end of turn, knocking them down to 2. Taking away their life gives them fewer options, and now an end of turn Gao trigger will destroy them. They have a command beacon for turn, which is going to get them back Bossum. They play Bossum, they equip the Greaves to it, and then think better and equip them to Sig. Maybe they're removal checking me here, I don't know. They equip the Buster Sword, they equip Cranial Plating, they are going to cast a Fire Shrieker, and that's going to get them their Bossum triggers. So Bossum is unblockable and draws a card. They equip the Fire Shrieker, the Champion Helms, and finally the Dancing Shoes so that it can go into combat. But we are going to stop them on combat. We're going to get rid of a mirror and get back our Phyrexian Portal, and that ETB trigger is going to cause them to sacrifice their board. We get the GG here. At the end of turn, Gao would have triggered, destroying them, and that's the match for us. So game number 3 was essentially a 4-player game. The Lelia player didn't get to do too much, but they did still get to take some game actions, make some choices, and have some effect on the game. Obviously, Bossum was archenemy from the go with that Soul Ring start, and it was fortunate for us that Joshua and Basim got into a slugging match there. We just got to sit back, sculpt our hand, get ready for once Joshua was eliminated. We could have potentially gotten involved in that little fracas with our Chaos Warp. It just felt better to let them spend them resources on each other while we did some setup. This was a fantastic game for the Goblin Welder plan. We really got to see that in action, got to see how tricky it could be and how you can be rewarded for making some plans and setting things up. It was also a bit of a study in caution, and those final turns, I definitely could have flashed back Isengard Unleash and attacked with the Mirror Battlesphere and just ended things. But I was worried about cheaper free interaction out of a Dimir deck that could have had an Offer You Can't Refuse or a Fierce Guardianship that would have completely punished us for casting a 7-mana spell, might have left us with our pants down, and in a situation where Basim could swing over and kill us. I thought the Joshua deck was really cool. It feels like discard decks in general are just picking up so much support in the recent years that you're getting lots of things that work with those, creating really fun triggers and intricate gameplay that it's fun to watch. And I am definitely in the market for building a deck like that, so look forward to one in the future. Maybe Joshua, maybe something else. Lelia we had already seen. We know what that deck can do, and it can do some pretty cool things. It's just unfortunate that they stumbled on mana a bit there and weren't quite able to recover before they dropped out. Obviously, we got to see Basim at peak performance there, but even without the Soul Ring, I think it would have been a force at the table. The commander just does so much. It draws a card each turn, it comes unblockable, and it gets additional counters for dealing damage, so the threat continues to grow. And the Dimir Artifact game plan is really strong in its own right. When you're being rewarded just for playing into it and leaning into equipment slightly, it's a very powerful deck, and I'd be interested to maybe try something out with it someday. I don't think I'd go quite so linear and be very, very equipment focused where I have 25 equipments like they did. I might try to do some other tricksy stuff similar to, honestly, it'd be maybe a little similar to this deck where you have an artifact-based game plan that can use its commander to help win the game, close out the game, or serve as, in the case of Basim, probably a card advantage engine. I thought my opponent approached that match strategically correctly overall, but there is some intricacy that they might not have been tapped into with their deck. For example, Academy Ruins could have disrupted my Goblin Welder plan, and I was thinking about that during the game, but every time they tapped out and I didn't have to worry about it. But that's something to keep in mind with a deck like that, where you have lots of small pieces that can come together to do even more than you'd expect. That's going to do it for the Game 3 wrap-up. Let's head into some final thoughts. So, final thoughts on Gao. It's not great content, but I don't think there's much about this deck I would change. Maybe some tweaking here and there, but overall it played out like I wanted to. It was really fun. I heartily encourage you, if you thought this was fun, to sleeve it up or rent it out on Magic Online and try it out. There were just tons of options all the time, and it felt like I had a lot of agency in terms of how I interacted with the game, with the deck. Finishing with Gao felt very feasible, and it didn't feel like we had too many cards that worked with any one of our plans, so I really liked the balance of different effects in the deck. If I were going to speculate, I think something like Sulfur Mayhem Dominus could potentially come out. It didn't feel like the extra 2 damage here and there was going to mean much, and it felt like we had plenty of ways to discard spells. So we might look at adding some more cards that can activate Gao in other people's turns, just because that chip damage could be valuable. And the nice thing is that most of those types of cards are going to play well in our deck anyways, because they're usually cheap artifacts, so they can be welded in and out. I was also really impressed by the way that welder plan played out, so we could look at playing some cards that play well with that get value out of going into the graveyard, like Chromatic Star or a Megasynth Wellspring. But overall, really like this deck. Not a lot of notes. I would run it back without any changes unless I really wanted to spend time agonizing over what I could tweak with it. That's going to do it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this journey with Gao Feral Artificer. If you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe, and most importantly of all at this stage, comment. Would love to hear comments about. You've probably noticed if you watched both of my videos, and if you haven't watched the first, the Gitrog Monster gameplay was a lot of fun. I'll throw a link somewhere. But I've already learned a lot in terms of editing videos, and so every video is going to get better and better as I go along. You can find me on social media. My Bluesky is here on the screen or down in the description. And otherwise, good luck and have fun in future endeavors. Magic Boy out.